trying to sing verse 20, Brother Steve. Y'all read that sometime. She could probably make it into a song. All right, it's good to see everybody this morning. I pray you've had a good week. Even if you haven't, you got the health and the life to get up and come here today, and that's something to be thankful for. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 11 this week. So this is our 11th week going through, I think we started in chapter 8. Last week we left off, we finished chapter 10. Saul had been anointed privately the chapter before in the street by Samuel. And last week it was made public. It was a public declaration that Saul was going to be the first king of Israel. There were a few that at the end of that time, at the end of that announcement, that God had touched. And they went home with the new king, King Saul. And the rest of the people were sent home. When it ended, Saul had not a place to rule. He didn't have anywhere to go to. No one had set anything up for him. No one had sent him away with anything. So there was a lot of work that had to be done still. And as we closed the chapter out, we saw that there were those that did not like Saul that were going to question everything. They questioned if he would even be able to do anything with the kingdom. And we saw that he had heard about these things, but he held his peace. So we're going to do a lot of page turning this morning, and then we'll settle into the lesson. But 1 Samuel chapter 11, we're going to read the first 11 verses. It says, Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out your right eyes, and lay it for reproach upon all Israel. And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, Give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers into all the coast of Israel. And then, if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul, and told the tidings of the ears of the people. And all the people lifted up their voices and wept. And behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field, and Saul said, What aileth the people, that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he had heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. And he took a yoke of oxen, and hewed them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the coast of Israel by the hands of the messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one accord, or with one consent. And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will come out unto you, and ye shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. So we'll see how many of these verses we actually get to today. But verse 1, let's start with a little history lesson here in the beginning. And I think that probably some of the greatest application for what we're going to talk about today as far as our personal growth here. It says, Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. What jumps out to us right there? These Ammonites, they come up, and they're prepared to set siege against Jabesh. And they ask them to make a covenant with them. And they said, If you'll make a covenant, we'll serve you. What happened? Fear. This was a time that they were so afraid that they were willing to give up freedom and family, all for the sake of life. Fear was their first reaction. So we're going to come back to that thought. Turn to Genesis chapter 19. We'll go through this as quickly as we can, but I don't know when, and I don't mean to say but some time ago, we had taught a 4 or 5 part lesson on Lot. And we talked about how Lot's descendants were intertwined so much with Israel throughout the years. So Genesis 19, verse 36 through 38. We'll read the end of this chapter. It says, Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab, the same as their father of the Moabites unto this day. And here's where it applies to us. And the younger, she also bare a son and called his name Benami, the same as the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So we have that study, and we can see here that the Ammonites, direct descendants of Lot. You know, tomorrow when we get up and we go to work, or you do whatever's on your plate for this week. Maybe you're taking off tomorrow and you're going to go fishing. It's awesome. We never know what that decision that we're going to make tomorrow without praying about it, thinking about it, it's going to have an effect later on down the road. See, if you remember the study on Lot, at first we talked about how Lot had done all these things, how he pitched his tent. He was a man of the city. He got so intertwined with the world that he was unrecognizable. But then if we went, at the end of that, we went all the way back, and who's the one, when he looked at Sodom and Gomorrah, it said it reminded him of Egypt. Who took him to Egypt when they were afraid? Abraham. All that started maybe with a little fear where Abraham was worried, and he goes, and then the next thing you know, Lot looks at this and he's like, hey, this reminds me of Egypt. They had it going on. And then here Lot messes up, and then what happens? You have two nations more or less come out of his ancestry, and we're reading about one of them this morning in 1 Samuel chapter 11. You never know how the small things are going to have an effect on the future. How future generations will be affected by anything. Even if it's something that seems harmless that I'm doing in front of your children on a Sunday, you never know. If they see me do something and they don't know what to do in 20 years and say there's church in turmoil, they're going to be like, well, I remember brother so-and-so handled it this way. And if I was wrong, they're going to make my same mistake again. So we can't afford to react in fear. When you became a parent or a grandparent and you hold that child and you're excited and you're looking at this little extension of you, or an extended extension of you, are you thinking, wow, what sins have I committed before you were ever born that you're going to pay for? Now, I don't mean to be negative, but that's real. The things I've done before I was a father are going to affect my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. That's sin. Something to think about. Something else we can take away in what we read. Actually, let's come back to that. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 2 this morning. We'll read verses 18 and 19. Deuteronomy 2, verses 18 and 19. Well, let's read 17 because this all to help tie in with what it says. That the Lord spake unto me, saying, Thou art to pass over through Ar, the coast of Moab, this day, and when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them, for I will not give thee of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given unto the children of Lot for a possession. I was telling Brother Steve this morning, this lesson, the first few verses, I could probably teach on for a couple weeks. But if you read this, why did God say don't go over there? Because of Lot. Why would he say because of Lot? Because of Abraham. Why would I say because of Abraham? Because a promise was made. God kept his word. God remembered it. It's like God preserved Ammon for this day that we're reading about in Saul's life. Now don't get me wrong, they are going to come up again a couple more times in this study, Lord willing. But God told him not to take the land, that it was preserved. So take comfort that even in sin, God keeps his promises. There's another application. God can preserve what he wants for his honor and glory later on. He sees the big picture, we don't. So let's paint this picture a little deeper. Turn to Judges, please, chapter 21, and then we'll get back into the main. Judges 21. And while you're turning there, I'm going to give you a little oversight. So if you were to go home this week and say you read Judges chapter 19, you're going to see the reason why the tribe of Benjamin didn't have much confidence, while they were the least in numbers. Because there was a Levite's concubine who was mistreated there. And basically what happened is the entire nation of Israel rose against Benjamin. And they left women, and they left enough seed that the tribe may grow again. I know we probably all read that. But when we read about Saul saying, I'm of the least, that's the reason why. So then what about this Jabesh? What about Jabesh Gilead? We read that in verse 1 of our text. So Judges 21, verses 8 through 12. Let's see what it says about it. It says, And they said, What one is there of the tribes of Israel that they come not up to Mizpah to the Lord? And behold, there came none to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For the people were numbered, and behold, there were none of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead there. And the congregation sent thither 12,000 men of the valiantest, and commanded them, saying, Go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and with the children. And this is the thing that ye shall do. Ye shall utterly destroy every male and every woman that hath lain by man. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male. And they brought them out unto the camp to Shiloh, which is the land of Canaan. Jabesh Gilead didn't want to get mixed up in this civil war, and it cost them. So the reason we read that is when they say that they don't know if there's going to be a man to help them, they don't know how the rest of Israel feels about them right now. Just to kind of tell you how I feel about it. So, what about King Saul? We read all that. He leaves, and there wasn't really a celebration, but it wasn't completely a time of discouragement. He wasn't completely negative. But the days of celebration, the days of positivity, we could say, are short-lived in our lives. They're few and far between when you learn to enjoy them, to be able to glean from them later. Saul goes out, and it's a short time later, and he's going to learn that the title comes with responsibility. And it was a rough start, and it wasn't perfect, but the enemy didn't care. Saul's got people of his own land against him already, and he hadn't been king for a few hours. And there were already those that didn't like him. And then here comes somebody, Nabash, comes in with Ammonites, wanting to siege war against one of his regions. The enemy doesn't care. Satan doesn't care if you're having a bad week. He wants to pile it on. Saul was learning this as king, as a figure of Israel. All right, one more thing to read. 1 Chronicles 19. And then we'll get into our lesson. 1 Chronicles 19. I just want to make the point of the Ammonites. Instead of going and trying to teach judges, we're just trying to do a basic overview of what we're looking at. So, 1 Chronicles 19, we'll read like 9 verses. I just want to see what kind of people they were, okay? And this is dealing with David. It says, Now it came to pass after this that Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, died, and his son reigned in his stead. And David said, I will show kindness unto Hanun, the son of Nahash, because his father showed kindness to me. And David sent messengers to comfort them concerning his father. So the servants of David came into the land of the children of Ammon to Hanun to comfort him. But the princes of the children of Ammon said to Hanun, Thinkest thou that David doth honor thy father, that he has sent comforters unto thee? Are not his servants come unto thee for to search and to overthrow and to spy out the land? Wherefore Hanun took David's servants and shaved them and cut off their garments in the midst hard by their buttocks and sent them away. Then there went certain and told David how the men were served, and he sent to meet them, and the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, Tarry at Jericho until your beards be grown, and then return. And when the children of Ammon saw that they had made themselves odious to David, Hanun, the children of Ammon sent 1,000 talents of silver to hire the chariots of the horsemen, and out of Mesopotamia and out of Sirah-Makkah and unto Zobah. So they hired 30,000 and 2,000 chariots, and the king of Makkah and his people, who came and pitched before Medeba, the children of Ammon gathered themselves together from their cities and came to battle. And David heard of it, and he sent Joab and all the hosts of the mighty men. I think we can stop there. I think the point's made. They're bad neighbors. They are something that's not going away. They do not go away for now. It's one thing to have a neighbor that is difficult to deal with. It's another thing to have a neighbor that you never can see eye to eye with. This is I don't know how else to word it, so don't judge me. This is kind of some of the things that maybe we've seen in my lifetime in the Middle East, where it's just constant turmoil, something all the time. We see descendants of two men who once left seeking a place that God had not revealed to them yet, Abraham and Lot. And these are their great descendants. And they can't get along. That's sad. Such a noble start. All right, let's get back into 1 Samuel now. All right, so verse 1. Now that we've had this history lesson. Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. This is a parlay of sorts that is offered up. Let us serve you. Again, without putting up a fight, without seeking counsel, they offer this. We cannot let fear dictate our life. That's easy to do. If you turn on the news, you're going to get mad and maybe even scared at the same time. We can't let that be our first reaction. We must have faith. We can't react and try to look for the quickest solution all the time. We'll come back to this thought in just a moment. Let's look at verse 2. It says, And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out your right eyes, and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. So they come to Nahash, and he's like, yeah, okay, this servant thing sounds good. I like what you're saying. I like where your head's at. But I'm going to need the right eyes. Is that a problem? This would be a humiliating thing. When they say a reproach of Israel, this is a mark against the God of Israel. If you're visiting that land, what happened to your right eye? What happened to his right eye? You're having to explain this story every time you meet someone who's never heard it. Well, we got scared and we didn't fight. We just gave in, and they asked for our right eye, so we give in. You think I'm not even going to offer you a fingernail without fighting? They had no confidence. They had no confidence in God, I believe, and they had no confidence in the other tribes of Israel. They give up. They offer to serve them, and the enemy asks for their right eye. Now, if they had given in, what kind of example would this be for the next generation and the next and the next and the next? There's also a pain portion of this thought. My question is how can one man make this decision, or how can a group of men make this decision for an entire group of people? Well, guys, guess what? They took the servant thing, but we also negotiated, and they're going to take our right eyes. I hope you don't mind, but I spoke for you. I mean, this seems silly to me. I told them to give me a minute. Let me think about it. I mean, who's thinking about that? They're going to take everything that we have, everything that God has given us in this land, our freedom, our possessions. We're going to serve them, and now they want our right eyes. What's your thoughts, guys? Can you imagine coming back and explaining this to the people under you? See, sometimes whenever I'm doing something, I don't realize how stupid it is until y'all say it out loud. Then I'm like, oh, man. But sometimes you got to hear it said out loud. Now, a little side note, but if Nahash had just said, okay, you could be our servants, they would have never sent out to see who would come and help them fight, would they? He would have been victorious if he hadn't been so confident in himself. So the Ammonites wanted to torment them. The pain of this, how does this heal? There's a lot of thoughts here that I'm trying to go over, but could you imagine taking this demand serious? So, as Brother Steve brought out Wednesday night, this would disable them from war. They wouldn't be able to shoot a bow. They wouldn't be able to throw a spear. It'd be hard to see anything coming in from the right side. But if you hold your shield and you're going into battle, you're blind. You can't see over your shield. You can't see anything else going on. I mean, they were essentially fish in a bucket. They were blind in the battle. It says this will be a reproach on all Israel as they represented this nation of God. It would spread around that they just gave in, that the rest of Israel let it happen. That's not good news. Because the honor and glory of the God of Israel would be questioned. The worst thing we can do is make someone question God's honor and glory. But think about that. If I go out and do something, I thought he was a child of God. That's a pretty serious accusation. Verse 3, it says, And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, Give us 7 days' respite, that we may send out messengers into all the coasts of Israel, and then if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. So they come up with this answer. Okay, we're going to be your servants. You want our red eyes? Cool. Just give us a week. We're going to send some people out. And if nobody comes, then we'll give in and we'll line up, get your fire built so you can jab me. How confident was Nahash that they weren't going to be able to pull this together in 7 days, that he allowed this to happen? What man is sitting there with his army ready to go, and he's like, hey guys, we're going to wait 7 days. This is going to be good. What if he'd said no? No, you don't have 7 days. What would they have done? Would they have picked up their swords and died, or would they have given in? Because the way the verse reads, where it says that they will come out to thee, it doesn't say against thee. It makes me think that they were probably going to give in, but that's just an opinion. The confidence of the enemy again. Who would come and help them fight? So we see this as a problem, but we can also look at it that we see God's hand in it, that he's allowing this to happen, that this would be for his honor and glory and for the good of his people. So it says that they were going to send messengers out to all the coast. Let's look at verse 3. It says that we may send out if there be no man to save us. If there be no man to save us. Why do we turn and get man's opinions? Why do I want man's guidance? How sad is it that God's people often look to man to solve their problems instead of looking to God to solve our problems? Now, don't get me wrong. God delivers without the help of man, though God may deliver through man. I'm not saying that. But our first reaction shouldn't be like, man, I've had a rough day. I need to call Brother Steve and talk to him so he can line me out and encourage me. My first reaction should be like, man, I need to take this to the Lord in prayer. Because all he's going to do is hear me, try to encourage me, and then hopefully he's going to pray. Our first reaction shouldn't be, let us see if there's a man to save us. It should be, let's bring this before the Lord. But guess what we'll do? We'll call Brother Steve and be like, hey, I had a rough day, man. Feel sorry for me. Verse 4. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul and told the tidings in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices and wept. So maybe Nahash thought perhaps that since Israel didn't have a common leader, or at least maybe he hadn't heard of a king in Israel, the established king, that they were never going to be able to pull it together this quickly. But I'm sure he'd heard of some of the victories they've had before when God went out and gave them victory, when they took the land. Nahash, I'm sure, maybe or maybe not, I don't know, he'd never heard of Samuel. Either way, I think he didn't think they were going to get it pulled off, or else why would he allow them to organize? But this verse reads to me like some of the messengers went straight to Gibeah to tell the news, and the people got in an uproar. And they're in an uproar for either one of two reasons. They're either greatly concerned with what's going on, or they're thinking, wow, this is the last thing I need. We just got a new king. There's been a lot of change going on. I don't want to deal with this, and now I got to go up here and handle this. Because that's a real thought. It's like one more thing. Oh, now I got to. Do we go and sacrifice ourselves? Do we sacrifice our people for this battle? Or are we like, man, I hate it for them? That's tough. So we see these messengers, I'm going to call them bad messengers, because the people of Gibeah hear the news before the king. Somebody could have got brownie points there at least, right? But it's like they come in, someone, anyone help. But they didn't go to the person who mattered, okay? But one of their thoughts may be, okay, well, Jabesh Gilead was kind of a gate city, and if the enemy were to take it, it would certainly leave them weak. Though they may not come in and have 100% success in Israel, they could have made life hard for a while. Side note, also, be careful for those who would rather cry for you than try to help you. A lot of people say the right thing, but when you really need someone, they're not there. So beware of those people. We want help when we're in disarray. We don't want pity, right? They're getting pity right now. Let's look at verse 5. And behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field, and Saul said, what aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. I love this verse. Saul coming from the herds of the field. He notices something, he knows, he hears it, what is wrong, what has happened, and he hears of the news of the men of Jabesh. Understand what we just read. How many kings come from the field, from the herds of the field? Especially new kings who would seem to be eager to prove themselves, right? And yet the first king is out here working just like he was a couple weeks before they even knew who he was. Saul was a worker. You know, one thing I'm gonna say here, and this is my opinion. He didn't think he was above work. That's an honorable trait in my opinion. He's king. He could have came in bold, and yet he's out here seeing after the herds. He wasn't afraid of work. He didn't think he was above it. I think we're seeing a humble leader with humility, at least in the first part of his life. And I think Saul is a man who can endure. Even in the later part of his life, God allowed him to endure. He didn't hear the news first, but he wasn't worried about reputation. He wasn't worried like, why didn't you come to me and tell me? Why'd you tell everybody else? And that's how we know his reaction was genuine, because it wasn't about him. He's working and he hears of the problem, cannot get tore up because we think we need to hear something first. If we hear it first or last, if we're doing it for the right reasons, our reaction is going to be the same. How can I help? I don't have to be so important in your life that you come to me first about everything. If I'm the last person you go to, I should still have that first reaction. What can I do for you? It doesn't matter where I rank at on your call list. What matters is that you know me well enough to know I'm going to help. I love the humility in this first king. We don't see Saul puffed up. We see a man who is king, yet he still has to work for a living. How many kings work for a living? Don't let a title or a job change you, not for the worst. Ever think about what his family thought, what his folks thought when he went home? Saul comes in, yeah, I'm sure you heard that, I'm king. Just wanted you to know, I'm going to my room. Wait a minute, you're king and you're going to live in my house? You're going to eat my food? That's what my dad would say. God had to intervene, I believe, in Kish's life and the rest of that family because they had to be patient in time to allow God to grow Saul. So you're going to be king, but you're going to work for me? All right, 4 a.m., you better be out with the flock or the herd or whatever you're seeing after that day. Get up. I don't care if you're king or what. We got work to do. You're eating. You're under this roof. These are things we don't think about. This is the humble beginning of the first king of God's chosen people. It was a growing phase, and I think God gave wisdom and patience to Saul and everyone around him. Saul's family, maybe God sent him there. Maybe he didn't have a palace because God knew he needed encouragement from his family to get through the first few years. I don't know. God didn't raise Saul in advancement. When the people asked for a king, they didn't go out and prepare a place for the king. God gave him the job, and now God is getting ready to qualify him for the job. God's fixing to give him the business of a king. While we're on this thought, I want to turn to Proverbs chapter 27. These are two of my favorite verses. These are life verses for me. I'll share that with you. Proverbs 27, verses 23 and 24. And I just think they tie in so perfect to what we're studying today. Proverbs 27, 23 and 24, it says, Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds. For riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation. Man, we can talk about that. Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks. So we apply this to a king who is out seeing after sheep. What about a king who's seen after his people? What about a father who's seen after his family? You need to know the state of your family. If they're in your house, you need to know them. You need to, and this is part of our family class that we're going to be doing. You need to know them good enough to know their weaknesses and their strengths so you can help grow both. Know the state of your flocks. Be diligent every day. That's what matters most. If you're looking at this from a shepherd's point of view, if they suffer, you suffer. You too. Be diligent. Just because you got it now, verse 24, for riches are not forever. Just because you've got it now, just because there's money in the bank right now, just because you have a job right now, don't mean you will a month from now. Then what are you going to do? Are you going to react like we saw in verse 1? Or are you going to react in faith and say, God did it before and he can do it again if he wills? The crown doesn't endure forever. That was wrote for Saul. Just because you're on top of things now, just because it's going your way, just because you have health, doesn't mean you're going to have it next week. We don't know what tomorrow holds. You enjoy it today. I love it because you never arrive. You're never good to stop. You're never good to retire. You show me one person who retired in the Bible. You can talk to me after once you think of it. You may retire from your job next week, and that's great. I wish I could. But you never retire from serving God. You never retire from coming to church. You never retire from studying. You never retire from praying. You never arrive. I might even argue with you about the physical retirement. I'm scared to slow down. you never arrive. Just because you think, hey, I got it now, I've got X amount of dollars put back, and it looks good for the future, in a year, it may all be gone. Then what are you going to do? You got to know how to go out and be a shepherd again. That's what you got to do. You got to keep putting in the work. There's no retirement. There's always a ministry. Whether it's in your own home, whether you're a grandmother and you have 30 grandchildren in your house at all times, that's a ministry. A piano teacher, that's a ministry. You never arrive. Be diligent to know your herd. There's always something to do. Solomon wrote it out, but Saul lived it, I believe. Nothing lasts forever here. Kingdoms come and go. Nations fall. Armies get conquered. If it's man-made, it has problems. You go buy a sweet F450 for like $150,000 platinum, and guess what? In 5 years, it won't be worth $30,000, and it's going to have problems. It's going to need work. It's man-made. Nothing endures unless it's God-given. Riches are gained and riches are lost. If I had the money I threw away, I'd have more money than I have now. I guarantee it. Be diligent to know the state of your flock. We see this first king, and this news comes in, and he's probably out here, and God's dealing with him because God's growing him whenever he's out here walking. And this news comes in, and this humble beginning, he comes out of the field dirty and dusty. I'm trying to paint a picture to hear the news. And as he hears it, it says he weeps, and through that dust on his face, you can probably see a tear fall. He had a great start, I think. Saul applied it to the herds in the field. And I believe in the beginning, and we'll talk about this, Lord willing, in the future, but in the beginning of his kingship, he applied it to the nation. But later on, he got so busy, he forgot where he came from. To me, when you read in Proverbs, at the end of verse 24, and doth the crown and earth to every generation, you just don't ever know what tomorrow holds. You may have to fall back. There's a song, I know I'm not going to say it, but in that song it says you may have to crawl even after you walk. I love that because I've had to do it a lot. That means something to me. Just because we got it made now, don't mean we're going to have it made forever. That's why we look forward to that day where this body's perfect and that praise is perfect, because then we will endure forever. I've asked it 100 times, but when did hard work become something to look down on? I mean, used to everybody worked hard, and now it's like, hey, he has to work for a living. You believe that guy? No, I want to shake his hand. I'm proud to see that. I'm proud to see people who are still working for things. Let's continue in verse 5. We're going to have to hurry. I got on a sidetrack there. We see some good traits of a leader. He says, what's wrong with them? Maybe I can help. Maybe I can just weep with them and let them know I care. Either way, I care. Tell me what the problem is with the people. He wanted to get the news, and he showed he cared. Let's hurry up. Verse 6. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he had heard those tidings, and his anger was greatly kindled. So when he hears this, the Spirit of God came upon him, and he was greatly angered. This is proper anger, if that makes sense to you. God sent his Spirit upon him, and it caused him to be angry about the tidings about this attack. It's like the Spirit of God caused this, and it caused the proper reaction. Now what do I mean by that? This reaction had to be perfect. It had to be a godly reaction. It couldn't be Saul's words. It couldn't be Saul's reaction, because God had a plan. This anger at the situation that the men of Jabesh, they hadn't sent out people sooner. I believe he was upset about that. That they backed down. I believe he may have been concerned about that. But mostly I believe at the boldness and the inhumanity of the enemy in the attack on God's people. This wasn't a Benjamin's reaction. I have to teach this real quick. This wasn't Saul because he's a Benjamite taking care of Jabesh because they didn't come in and attack the other Benjamites. Because God filled him and God had the reaction. We'll study verse 7 next week. Let's read it real quick just to tie in, and we'll wrap up. It says, "And he took a yoke of oxen and hewed them in pieces and sent them throughout all the coast of Israel by the hands of the messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent." This reaction and this immediate wisdom for Saul to handle this situation like this, it wasn't him. This was God. This was that spirit that filled him, because it had to be right. He had to do something that the rest of the people were going to be like, wow, we need to go. Godly wisdom. He gave him godly wisdom. The wisdom to handle himself like this, to be a king, to send out messengers like he did, but to be bold. God gave him boldness to declare this and to be so adamant in declaring it. To be a king and to make this threat, and I'm thinking pretty soon into his kingship. That's a bold man. That boldness came from God, I believe. Then God, the giver of that wisdom, had his back, and he caused the fear to fall on the people, that they would show up in the battle. God had a plan. For lack of a better way to explain it, I'm going to say it like this. God was giving Saul authority here. That's a very important word we'll talk about, Lord willing, next week. So let's wrap up. The man who knew how to look after his herd in the field, he'd get angry and he'd be bold in defending the sheep, perhaps, just like he did in the field. And we see that same anger, that same zeal here given to him by God for God's people. We'll study this next week. He mentions Saul, which was important. So I'd ask you that you pray for the study. I pray you're not growing tired of it yet. It's fixing to change here over the next few weeks. It may start going a different direction, but we'll pick up here again next week. I'd ask that you pray for it. Pray for the others teaching, and pray for our pastor and his wife. Brother Derek, would you dismiss us?